Sarah Mitchell had stopped believing in genuine kindness the day her so-called friends abandoned her after the accident. Confined to a wheelchair at 26, she'd learned that pity was plentiful, but true compassion was rare. So when her coworkers giggled about setting her up on a blind date with someone special, she knew it was another cruel joke. What she didn't know was that this setup would shatter everything she thought she understood about human nature, and leave everyone involved weeping for reasons none of them expected. The restaurant was too fancy for Sarah's comfort. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across white tablecloths, and the prices on the menu could feed her for a week. She adjusted her wheelchair nervously, acutely aware of the other diners' subtle glances. Her co-workers, Jessica and Mark, had insisted she come, practically begging her to give dating another chance. They'd been so enthusiastic, so convincing, that Sarah had foolishly allowed hope to creep back in. Now, sitting alone at a corner table, she checked her phone for the third time. Her date was 15 minutes late. The familiar sting of rejection began its slow burn in her chest. Of course he wasn't coming. Why would he? She'd seen this pattern before, the initial agreement, the gradual excuses, the eventual ghosting. Being in a wheelchair made her invisible to most people, or worse, a project they'd rather avoid. Sarah Mitchell. A deep voice interrupted her spiral of thoughts. She looked up, expecting the waiter, and felt her breath catch. The man standing before her wore an impeccably tailored navy suit that probably cost more than her car. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his eyes held an unexpected warmth that seemed genuine. He was handsome in an understated way, but what struck her most was how he looked directly at her face, not down at her wheelchair. "I'm Daniel," he said, extending his hand. "I apologize for being late. Board meeting ran over." Sarah shook his hand, confused. Board meeting. Daniel settled into the chair across from her with easy grace. "I should probably mention, I'm Daniel Chen, CEO of TechVision Industries. Your colleagues reached out to my assistant last week with a rather unusual proposition." His lips curved into a slight smile. "They were quite persuasive about me meeting you." The blood drained from Sarah's face. TechVision was the parent company of her employer. Daniel Chen was essentially her boss's boss's boss, a business legend who'd built a tech empire from nothing. And her coworkers had set her up with him as what? Some kind of charity case. A pity date with the CEO for the poor wheelchair girl. "I'm so sorry," Sarah stammered, her hands gripping the wheels of her chair. "I didn't know they'd contacted you. This is humiliating. I should go." She started to turn her wheelchair, but Daniel's voice stopped her. "Wait, please." There was something in his tone, not pity, but a quiet intensity that made her pause. "I agreed to come tonight, but not for the reason you think." Sarah turned back slowly, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "Then why? To feel good about yourself. To check charity work off your billionaire to-do list." Daniel flinched, and she immediately regretted her harsh words. But instead of getting angry, he leaned forward, his expression serious. "May I be completely honest with you?" When she nodded, he continued. 7 years ago, I was in a car accident. I spent 4 months in a wheelchair during recovery. I learned things during those months that changed how I saw the world, how invisible you become, how people stop seeing you as a whole person. When your colleagues reached out, describing their prank idea, I was furious. Sarah's heart sank further. So he did know this was meant to be a joke. They thought it would be funny, Daniel continued, his jaw tightening. Setting you up on a fake date, watching you get stood up or humiliated. They laughed about it in their email. He pulled out his phone and showed her the original message chain. Sarah's stomach turned as she read Jessica and Mark's cruel words, their mockery of her loneliness, their betting on how she'd react. I had HR pull their employment files that same day, Daniel said quietly. But before I did anything, I wanted to meet you. Not because I felt sorry for you, but because anyone who could inspire such cruelty from small-minded people must be someone extraordinary who threatened them somehow. Sarah wiped at her eyes, overwhelmed. I don't understand. Daniel signaled the waiter, who brought over a folder. Jessica and Mark were terminated this afternoon for workplace harassment and discrimination. They've been creating a hostile environment for you for months. I had IT pull all their emails and messages. He slid a document across the table. This is a formal apology from the company, along with a settlement for what you've endured. But that's not why I asked you here. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I asked you here because I wanted to know if you'd have dinner with me. A real dinner, not a setup or a pity date. I've read your work proposals, Sarah. Your ideas for accessible technology interfaces are brilliant. I've also heard from other employees that you're the person who stays late to help new hires, who remembers everyone's birthdays, who brings in homemade soup when someone's sick. You're the kind of person I actually want to know. Sarah sat speechless, her mind reeling. This couldn't be real. People like Daniel Chen didn't sincerely want to have dinner with people like her. As if reading her thoughts, Daniel added softly, I know it's hard to trust this. But I learned something during my time in that wheelchair. The only disability that truly limits us is the inability to see others as fully human. You've never had that disability, Sarah. You've remained kind in a place that tried to break you. That's not weakness. That's extraordinary strength. Something in Sarah's chest cracked open. She'd been so focused on what she'd lost, her mobility, her independence, the life she'd planned, that she'd forgotten what remained. Her compassion, her resilience, her refusal to become bitter despite everything. I'd like to stay for dinner, she whispered. Daniel's smile transformed his entire face. I was hoping you'd say that. They talked for 3 hours. Daniel shared stories of building his company, of failures and successes, of his struggles during recovery. Sarah opened up about her accident, her challenges, her dreams for creating technology that would help others like her. They discovered a shared love of terrible science fiction movies and an equally shared dislike of mushrooms. The conversation flowed like old friends reconnecting, not strangers on a first date. As the evening ended, Daniel insisted on walking Sarah to her car. Not pushing her wheelchair, she'd been adamant she didn't need help, but simply walking beside her as equals. I have a proposition, Daniel said as they reached her vehicle. TechVision is launching a new accessible technology division. I want you to lead it. Not because of what happened tonight, but because you're the most qualified person I've encountered. Your salary would triple, and you'd have full autonomy to build something meaningful. Sarah stared at him, shocked. You're serious? Completely. Take a few days to think about it. He handed her his business card. And Sarah, regardless of your decision about the job, I'd very much like to see you again. No setups, no obligations. Just two people who enjoyed each other's company. 3 months later, Sarah stood in TechVision's new accessible technology lab. Stood being a relative term, as she remained in her wheelchair, but she was standing in the metaphorical sense, as a leader, an innovator, a person valued for her mind and her heart. Her team was developing revolutionary interfaces that would change lives. And Daniel, he'd proven that night that true character reveals itself in how we treat those we have power over, not those we want to impress. They'd been dating for 2 months now, taking things slowly, building something real on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. Jessica and Mark's cruel prank had inadvertently brought together two people who understood that humanity's greatest gift isn't found in grand gestures, but in the simple, profound act of seeing another person fully, wheelchair, scars, fears, dreams, and all, and choosing to honor their inherent worth. Sometimes the worst intentions create space for the best outcomes. Sometimes being broken open is what allows the light to get in. And sometimes, what begins as tears of humiliation transforms into tears of joy, reminding us that kindness, when it's genuine, has the power to heal wounds we didn't even know we carried. Sarah had stopped believing in genuine kindness, but Daniel had reminded her it still existed. And in doing so, he'd given her something far more valuable than a job or even love. He'd given her back her faith in humanity.